The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this Peach Bowl recap, where Florida basically just destroys Michigan 41-15. And joining me for this episode is Will Miles from his site readandreaction.com and on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. Will, you can probably hear it in my voice. It was a good college football Saturday for the Peach Bowl in Atlanta.
Yes, that sounds like you met up with some friends and may have imbibed in various spirits, just like a lot of the other people down there in Atlanta after the game. I think people were apprehensive heading in, and the release after the game was pretty palpable. I'm sure for you down there, but also on Twitter and sort of throughout Gator Nation. It's nice to get a win against a top 10 non-conference opponent. Sort of puts a stamp on the season, but also it's been a long time since Florida's beaten a non-conference opponent quite like that. Maybe going back to Ohio State in 2006, really being the last time that they demolished a Big Ten opponent like that. So good feelings all around. Got to feel really promising about heading into the offseason. And, unfortunately now we've got, 8 months until things start again. But looking forward to an offseason where we don't have questions about whether we have a quarterback who can win a game. The question this offseason is going to be, who is that guy? Not necessarily do we have him. And that's a good place to be, and hasn't been a place we've been in probably 10 years.
Yeah. Going on Saturday, look, the Gators were ready for this one. Will and Gator Nation was ready for it as well. You were in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta. Gator fans, Gator Nation was everywhere. Got the tailgate with our Harmonic Wood friends there, and fans were loud during the game, and definitely had some fun after the game. Much like the season itself, this one was fun, Will. And hey, look, we've said it time and time again all season, but when the season's wrapped up, we just got done with the last game. You can definitely say Florida football is fun again.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really sort of, I think, the takeaway from this, and also the takeaway from the season. I mean, so Mullen ends up his season 3-3 against teams that are going to finish ranked in the top 25 of the college football playoff, and overall that record has been pretty abysmal under McElwain and Muschamp. So overall, they're 9-28 against those teams since Urban Meyer's last year. So to go 3-3 in his first year with the 4-7 season last year, and the guys coming back from suspension, and Franks, what would you get from him? And sort of all those storylines heading into the year. This was really, I think, sort of the top end scenario of what we might expect, minus maybe the Missouri game. But, again, when you end the season getting to 10 wins, you end the season beating a big-time Big Ten opponent. Jim Harbaugh, for all of his flaws and all of his inability to beat top 10 opponents, is still bringing in top 10 recruiting classes every year. It's still consistently the second best program in the Big Ten. And so Florida is making its way up. It's a long climb, I think, to Alabama and potentially even Georgia. But that climb has to start somewhere, and it started yesterday against Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, going back to the whole making it fun again. I mean, that's exactly what it was. And part of the fun was beating Michigan, finishing in the top 10, and doing it, Will, like you said, a year after getting throttled by Michigan to open the season and winning 4 games and now winning 10 games. These types of seasons and that performance versus Michigan is the Gator standard. That's what, Mullen brings that up all the time, the Gator standard. And, this was a good way to kick it off for his campaign. And look, we know the program needs to take another step, but in year one under Mullen, this is about the best that could have happened. And that's what he brought. And, that was the point that you kind of made. Now, I just think it definitely deserves to be said again. Year one, it was fun. Florida football is fun again. And, hey, look, we'll get into what actually happened there in the Mercedes-Benz Dome. Florida and Michigan. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on newsforjacks.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News for Jack sports team. Also catch us on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and Spotify. And when using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So, Will, much like every other game, and of course the season going into the season, all about the quarterback here, and the way to end the season here is another solid performance from the Gators quarterback Felipe Franks, the offensive MVP for the Peach Bowl. did it with his arms, did it with his legs. Stat recap here: 13 to 23, 173 yards in the air, 1 touchdown. Was pressured a good bit early on, but played turnover free football. Average per pass attempt 7.1, average per completion 12.1 yards. And then on the ground, of course, kind of where he's part of his game that has kind of elevated his play in the last quarter of the season here. 14 carries, 91 yards, 5.3 yards a carry, a long of 30, touchdown run for about 20 yards as well. Calling some of those plays on himself here. So we're going back to all kinds of quarterback previews before the season, and it's not an original thought that we had, but we really dove into the numbers of just how much a running quarterback is essential for the best in Mullen's offense. So as the season got into the later parts of the schedule, it was evident that the offense found a big bit of a groove, and that included using Franks on the ground a bit.
Yeah, they made the switch after the Missouri game. You could really tell. In the Missouri game, they weren't running him. They were protecting him a little bit. He was missing throws. He wasn't really getting into the rhythm. And then they started out a little bit tentative in that South Carolina game. And then in the second half, just let it loose. And Franks, I think, wound up with 16 rushes in that game. And then in the game against Florida State, he was running all over the place. A lot of read options off of running against sort of those large fronts. And then obviously yesterday against Michigan had 14 rushes for 74 yards, almost the leading rusher on the team as well as the leading passer. He played really, really well in the first quarter. He had 93 pass yards in the first quarter, averaged almost 12 yards a pass. And from there, the passing was pretty ineffective for the rest of the game, except for he did hit the big plays down the field that really made the difference. So the pass to Keontae Lewis that kind of put the game away for that last touchdown. He had a 30-yard pass to Hammond as well that set up a touchdown. But yeah, it was the running from Franks that really set Florida apart. It was the one thing that you sort of looked at and said, okay, Shea Patterson and Felipe Franks are kind of equivalent when you look at their ability to run the ball. And yesterday, Patterson had 10 rushes for 5 yards, and he opened up the game with a 21-yard rush to start the game and then had nothing from then on. And that comparison, really, the 10 rushes for 5 yards for Patterson, the 14 rushes for 74 yards for Franks, Florida was able to keep the ball moving and was able to keep an extra guy occupied by the threat of Franks running once they finally decided to turn it over to P. Ryan and to Scarlett.
Yeah, I don't know where I got he ran for 91 yards. Yeah, you're right. It was 74 yards he ran for. But either way, yeah, a big part of the ground there. And as you said, I think there was the one throw that he missed deep downfield to Jefferson, but ever since the Georgia game where we really got onto him for missing downfield throws, in the Missouri game as well, he's even kind of started hitting those plays a little with a little more consistency as well. But I just don't think it can be stressed enough. Just I think confidence more than anything. Not getting rattled like he did at times last year. I mean, look, we saw plenty of times where Michigan players were just basically trying to bring him down. They have his arms on his shoulder pads, trying to drag him down. He finds a way to get loose. He's throwing the ball to get rid of the ball and not taking a sack. At times last year it was taking a sack or running out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage. And I think as the season played on for 13 games, it was the little things that really added up to make Felipe Franks into a serviceable quarterback, and hopefully one that can take the next step next year with another coaching and more seasoning from Dan Mullen. Now, you can really go into the offseason and, it's not so much learning the playbook now. It's learning the nuances and it's learning the little things, and we can work on footwork and things to figure out where he can hit that deep ball with a little more consistency, hopefully there. But, to me, it was the little things that don't necessarily show up on a stat sheet that made the big difference for me with Felipe Franks.
Yeah, I mean, you saw some of that in this game where he had multiple options on plays that he could take. They had that 5 wide formation with the quad formation down on the wide side of the field multiple times. And were able to take advantage of that, and I think he had multiple options off of that, and he seemed to choose the right option every time, depending upon what configuration Michigan was in. You can't give the offensive line enough credit. Now, they had 3 sacks, Michigan did, but those sacks came on blitzes. Winovich came in one time. There were a couple other times where Franks, it wasn't necessarily him holding the ball. It was just there wasn't anybody open, and he took a sack. Sometimes taking the sack is the right play, right? Cover up the ball, get hit. And the other thing is that Florida last year, so they scored a touchdown in the first half on a 2nd and 19. They scored a touchdown in the second half on a 3rd and 20. And last year they couldn't have gotten a 3rd and 20 against the Citadel. I mean, they just didn't have the capability. They didn't have the firepower, and they couldn't block it.
And it would have been a play-action play on 3rd and 20.
Well, it would have been an awful play call as well. But I mean, 3rd and 20, they run the ball, and Piran rips off a 53-yard rush for a touchdown. I mean, that's not. I mean, that's execution at that point, and just the fact that they're always going to try to convert that first down rather than just saying, okay, let's get 8 yards and punt. And Mullen has sort of brought that attitude. That attitude has been transferred to Franks, particularly after the Missouri game. I think it was basically like, you're going to get booed no matter what you do. Go and enjoy it. And certainly in the South Carolina game, he did enjoy being the villain a little bit. And you could see the emotion on his face in the interview after this game. This game meant a lot to him. And hey, congratulations to him, because he's taken an awful lot of flack, and he's played very well this year. I mean, I think I haven't added up everything. He was above average using yards above replacement and using QB rating this year. He was an above average quarterback after being really abysmal last year. And so, if he takes another step next year, Florida's going to be really, really good. I think people have been waiting for Emory Jones to take control, or they've been waiting for Franks to be replaced. And ever since Trask came in that second half against Missouri, Franks has played like a high level starter in the SEC. And if that's what we get next year, man, I'm excited.
And the thing was, go back to that Missouri game, and I don't want to harp on it too much there. All in all, now that the season is over with and we have a whole season to look out for, it was just a bad game. That's really all that it amounts up to. It was a bad game at a terrible time a week after. The Georgia game wasn't so good either. But you chalk it up to that Missouri game was the absolute low point for Felipe Franks, and it really, going back and looking at it, was no more than, to me, it was just a bad day.
Well, and it was the low point for the team. I don't, it wasn't as if the defense was stopping anybody that day either. Yeah. So, we can talk about Frank's missing throws. We can talk about missed assignments on the offensive line. We can talk about breakdowns in coverage. All of those things happened in the game against Missouri. And I think afterwards, the players even admitted that they had sort of taken the loss to Georgia into that game against Missouri. And Missouri's a pretty good team. And so you can't do that in the SEC. It's one of the reasons why a team like Notre Dame can make it all the way to the playoff and then gets absolutely demolished. It's because they didn't have to do that back to back stuff. They get Navy a week after they play USC or something like that. And so, in the SEC, it's different. You play teams that are conditioned to take on elite teams every week. And I think really when you're looking at what we're hoping to see next year, I mean, you sort of mentioned being able to hit the deep pass more often, things like that. I don't necessarily know whether the flaws in his game or in any of these players' games are really going to be close. I think what we need to look for is more consistency, right? So the Missouri game, and even within like first halves and second halves, there's just a lot of inconsistency with the team right now. Now they're still putting up 41 points a game here at the end of the year. So hey, I'll take it, right? I mean, if you're going to put up 41 against Michigan and Florida State, I mean, they're scoring. We haven't scored 41 points in back-to-back games probably since like 2009. So, I think you take it, but you also say, okay, to take that next step, what do you need to do? I think it's just a matter of consistency. I don't think there's anything that needs to get fundamentally better. I think it's just, not taking the bad throw in the first quarter into the second quarter, not missing the read that puts you in a 3rd and long. Those sorts of things that are going to happen from time to time, having those happen less often. Again, the false starts penalties last year that killed them. They've had a few of those this year. They were a pretty penalized team. I think if they can eliminate some of the penalties and they can become a little bit more consistent, this can be a really good team next year.
All right, well, so let's include the running backs here to get a total of 257 rushing yards. Scarlett and Piran brought in 180 yards of that 257. Then we had a great play call with the sweep to Tony. That was 30 yards there as well. So, got to give it up to this group. The running backs, the offensive line, it looked like early on that this might be a repeat of last year's game, and Michigan come out on those first couple of drives on defense and really brought the physicality to Florida. But, it ended up reversing, and the Gators were the more physical team at the end of the day. So 257 rushing yards, while Michigan was only giving up 116 yards a game on the ground. So Florida, dominated on the ground, something that Michigan hadn't seen all season. Yeah, I know they were missing some players, but it was more than just that. When you look at how the game played out, hey, look, and the Gators are averaging 210 yards for the season coming into this game, and 257 when it was all said and done. So the Gators rushed above their average and way more than the average Michigan was giving up.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the first quarter, they really went away from the running game pretty heavily. I mean, there were 8 rushes and 8 passes, but a bunch of those rushes were Frank's runs. And they got down in the red zone. They didn't give the ball to P. Ryan or Scarlett at all. They very clearly put an emphasis on the pass to start the game, and then that completely switched in the second quarter. And some of that was because Frank started to get loose, but some of that was also because they were able to get into those 3rd and 4, 2nd and 6 situations where they could run some of those plays off of the 5 wide formations and get first downs and move the sticks. I mean, when you look at it, Michigan had 3 explosive plays in the first quarter and only converted 1 into scores. There was a 21-yard run for Patterson on the first play. They turned that on that drive a little bit. I'm surprised the replay went Florida's way on the play with the running back going out of bounds. I think he was out of bounds. I think the idea of it being indisputable, anyway, but they turned the ball over on downs. Then they had a 27-yard pass to Zach Gentry on the next drive, and there was a punt, and then a 41-yard pass to Nico Collins, and they turned that into an 8-yard touchdown reception. Whereas Florida settled for field goals in the first quarter. They had a 41-yard pass to Jefferson, stalled in the red zone, a 31-yard pass to Hammond, and then stalled in the red zone. And it wasn't until Franks got going in the second quarter that they were able to punch the ball in the end zone. It really felt a lot like the Florida State game too, especially in that second quarter where you were sitting there watching it going, last year, Florida was ahead by 4 points at the half and didn't feel like they deserved it. And you were like, wow, if they come out and play even remotely like they did in the first quarter or the first half, they're going to get blown out. And yesterday, it felt the opposite. It felt like Florida had a 3-point lead, that they had earned that 3-point lead and that they should probably be up by, 10, 14, 21 points at that point and just hadn't been able to put it in the end zone. The exact same thing that happened against Florida State. So again, when we talk about consistency, I think it's not only consistency of the players, but consistency of the play calls. Because you get down the red zone, 1st and goal from the 3, you would figure that would be a time when you give the ball to Scarlett and you give the ball to P. Ryan. And they did that in the second half, including on that beautiful pitch play where Scarlett was just wide open on the outside on the edge. They could have put this game away a lot sooner if they'd done that. But hey, they had 9 explosive plays in the entire game. That's, I think, the most for the entire year. They had 293 of their 413 yards on 9 plays. So, this was really a story of Florida's defense gave up 3 explosive plays in the first quarter and gave up none from then on. Michigan's defense gave up 2 explosive plays in the first quarter, held Florida to field goals, and then gave up another 7. And those 7 turned into 7, 14, 21 points. And, that's the difference in the game right there.
Yeah. You brought up the Florida State game. Oh, I got a little echo there. Hopefully it'll go away. But yeah, I take the same thing at halftime saying, look, this feels exactly like the Florida State game. And eventually, once they got into the red zone, started converting. As you said, hit the big plays as well, though. But let's go back and look at when we found out Florida was going to play Michigan. Will, we spent a lot of time on looking at this Michigan defense and just how good they have been all year. And the defensive stats, they showed that. And then now it also shows how good of a performance this was for the Gators offense. We'll go back and Michigan ranked 10th in the country and only giving up 17.6 points per game. The Florida offense scores 34 points in the game. Wolverines were number 1 in yards per game, only giving up 262.5 yards a game. Gators total 427. Wolverines defense was ranked 3rd in yards per play in the nation with 4.2, and the Gators hit big plays and had an average of 6.7 yards per play, 2.5 more yards per play than the Michigan average. So, yes, this defense was, highly regarded. Yes, they were missing some guys, but as I said, I'll keep going back to that. I don't think they would have made that big of a difference here. It probably would have been a little closer game with those guys there, but once this Florida offense found this groove, they were hard to stop.
Yeah, Michigan had 9 tackles for loss. They had 3 sacks. That was a 15% tackle for loss percentage, and 5% sacks. So it's not like they weren't getting into the backfield. And that was one of the things that I sort of highlighted in my preview was without Rashawn Gary, they had trouble getting to the quarterback, and they had trouble stuffing the run. And early on, especially, they were in the backfield quite a bit. And Franks was kind of able to throw them out of it. And then to have the added wrinkle of Franks being as effective of a runner as he was really loosened things up along the way. You got to give Mullen a lot of credit for the game plan. I had pointed out that, and most people had seen this, that Ohio State had run a lot of different crossing routes, and they'd done it by bunching receivers in an area and then getting Michigan in one-on-one and then dragging a guy across while they basically had the other two receivers run pick plays. But that's an offensive pass interference a lot of times. And so what Mullen did, and Heward pointed this out on the broadcast, what Mullen did was he made sure that they threw to Pirine behind the line of scrimmage, which means your receivers are allowed to block. And so he eliminated any concerns that the officials might have looked at that tape, or that Harbaugh might have warned the officials to look at that tape and say, hey, watch out for these offensive pass interference calls. They couldn't call it because the little wheel play to Pirine was completely legal. And so, it was really impressive to see Mullen take the tape from the Ohio State game, put his own wrinkle on it in order to make it work for what Florida was trying to do. I mean, how many times have we seen Pirine catch a ball as a wide receiver all year? Yeah. I don't think we've seen it at all. Yeah. And all of a sudden in the bowl game, he's out there and he's doing it 2 key times. They got a 3rd down conversion off of it. And then the next play was the big play to Van Jefferson. And then they got the touchdown on it when they were down in the red zone. They'd been struggling in the red zone. And you could tell that was sort of that was one of the plays that they probably would have dialed up for a 2-point conversion had they needed it, late in the game if they hadn't already used it in the red zone. They clearly had that as, sort of their go-to play once they got into those 3rd and short or 3rd and goal type situations, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah, I mean the play calling in this game was and it was plays to get to the outside because especially going toward the beginning of the game, like we said, Michigan was getting in the backfield a lot. Florida didn't have a lot inside to start the game, but a lot of the big running plays when they were struggling, or some of the big plays and conversions were to get the ball outside, as you said, Pirine on the tunnel screen, the Scarlet pitch, the Tony sweep, a lot of those big plays in the game. And Florida wasn't going to. Florida did have success, especially as the game wore on, of running inside the tackles, but it was the outside, and that's where the big plays happen, or a lot of the big plays happen was because of you're not going to beat Michigan, even with those guys that they were missing. You're not going to beat them time and time again inside, and good for Mullen there to dial up some plays, get the ball to the outside, and use the speed that Florida has to get some big plays.
Yeah, well, this is something that last year when they hired Mullen, I'd gone back and looked at seeing what he'd done in 2008, right before he left Florida. And you could tell that when he was in the middle of the field, he tried to get the ball to his playmakers on the outside. And sometimes that meant bunching the formation and then throwing deep into the outside. And that's what he did. The pass to Van Jefferson was a much more bunched formation than the wheel routes to Pirine. And then when Tebow was in charge, what they would do is they would spread 5 wide, and then Tebow would run up the middle if they had the numbers, and then he would hit little slants and all sorts of different things in the red zone to those 5 wide receivers that they had out there, just because they were basically playing the numbers game. And this is the first time I can really remember him putting 5 wide receivers out there with Franks and letting him do the same thing. And that sort of indicates that over the 15 practices in the bowl game, they started giving Franks more of Mullen's offense, I think. And that 5 wide set was specific to Michigan, but that's not new for Mullen. I mean, the wheel route to Pirine is something I haven't seen him run before. But having the concept of spreading everyone out and then looking at what that single high safety is doing and dictating whether you run the quarterback or whether you throw it out wide or exactly what you do. And you could see that in the film. The touchdown run for Franks, the 30 or 20-yard run that he ran for a touchdown, that was specifically because the safety came over to take away what they were trying to do with that quad formation and abandoned the middle of the field. And that meant the only thing he had to do was beat that middle linebacker. Give a lot of credit to the center, Buchanan, who got out to that middle linebacker, allowed Franks to cut back. It's an easy touchdown. And so Franks' ability to run and his ability to run Mullen's concepts, I think, in this game really were the difference maker for the entire game. I mean, this wasn't something Michigan could have prepared for on tape. They haven't seen it this year.
All right, so the Gators rushed for 200+ yards for the 9th time this season. Will that ties you just mentioned 2008, ties the 2008 Gators for the highest number of times to hit that mark since '96 there. So and the Gators combined for 8 200-yard rushing games in the whole entire Jim McElwain era, and the Gators had 9 this season. So look, we know. I mean, just by looking at it, we knew the differences between Mullen and McElwain. But there's a stat for you in just one season: 209 times the Gators ran for 200 plus yards, and 8 times from 2015 to 2017. And with the 257 rushing yards, Florida passed the 2007 Gators for the program's third highest rushing yardage total since 1990. And then Michael Pirine with 826 and Jordan Scarlett with 776 are the first pair of Gators with at least 775 rushing yards in a season since Elijah Williams and Terry Jackson both hit that mark in 1995. So, Will, when it's all said and done for the season, we thought this run game, we thought they would lean on the stable of backs that they had. With Pirine and Scarlett early on in the season. You had a lot of big runs by Dameon Pierce. So I don't think it looked quite like we thought it would before the season started. But when you go and look at the numbers, it kind of played out that way.
No, I think I expected the running to come from Emory Jones and Kadarius Toney back to quarterback position, and they just didn't do that. They just said, "Hey, we're going to teach Franks how to run the entire offense, and we're gonna go with that." I do think we should be a little bit. Now, your record is your record, and obviously, the record under McElwain, particularly last year, was poor. I do think that we should preface everything by saying I think Franks would have been better this year, even if he'd been coached by Nussmeier and McElwain. I don't think he would have been this good. I don't think they would have schemed the way they did. I mean, you could really tell early in the year they were sort of scheming against some of the limitations, and those limitations have started to get lesser and lesser as the season has worn on. But you can't say enough about what the staff did. I mean, even the play, I diagrammed this in the article that I wrote last night. The pitch play to Scarlett seems like such a simple play, but I remember 2 years ago against LSU when they botched almost an identical play down in the red zone against LSU, and people basically went nuts. Like, why wouldn't you just run it up the middle? Like, why would you pitch it out there? Well, it looked disjointed. There wasn't any rhythm. The play wasn't run very well. So very clearly they hadn't repped it that much. But also just the idea that when everything looks great, then it's the coach gets the credit. When everything doesn't look great, it doesn't. And I mean, I think a lot of that goes to McElwain, but I think some of it just goes to the players. We got to give them a lot of credit for putting in the focus, putting in the effort, and really dialing in for this game. Certainly they had a lot of fun, and I think Mullen has shown that he enjoys having fun when he's not on the field, but you can tell they paid attention to detail when they were on the practice field heading into this game. They knew they'd been embarrassed by Michigan the last time they played them. They didn't want that to happen again. And, congratulations to the team.
Absolutely. Will, if we move to the other side of the ball, going into this game, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was the only one who had declared for the NFL. We knew he was going to go leave early. We knew this was going to be his last game of his Florida career. And boy, does he get to go out in style, picking off 2 passes, returning 1 for a touchdown to cap off a great game, a great season, a great career for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, a Gator through and through. Really, he's orange and blue, of course, running through his veins. Hey, look, you put Chauncey Gardner in a bowl game, he's going to make some plays.
Well, it was interesting. They diagrammed it on the actual play or on the telecast for the first interception, and that's on Grantham. I mean, Grantham had them shift post snap into a different coverage, and it completely confused Patterson, and he threw right into the teeth of where Grantham wanted him to go. I think Grantham suspected they were going to try to take a deep shot, and he called something to bait Patterson into that interception. Now, obviously, Gardner-Johnson has to run it correctly. I mean, he has to make that catch on the run, and he's capable of doing that. But that's one where you look at the coaching again and say, hey, they put their players in a position to succeed, and the players executed. The second interception, obviously, on the tip play, hey, Gardner-Johnson's in the right place at the right time. He certainly deserves that, and you feel great for him. And he played very, very well throughout the game as well. But again, I think that goes back to where the defense really made its oats in this game. I mean, so Michigan just couldn't run the ball. They could not run the ball at all, So you look at the running, rush yards. They had 69 rushing yards for the entire game. They had 40 in the first quarter. So they had 29 rushing yards in the second, third, and fourth quarter. And you could see, so Florida had to blitz in that first quarter to start, and they had to stop Michigan to start with. So they had C.J. Henderson come on that blitz that ended one drive in the first quarter. They had Amari Burney coming to blitz a little bit later in the game as well. But beyond those two plays, it was the front four that was getting the pressure. I mean, there was the one play right after the block punt where Kyrie Campbell just basically drove the tackle right into Patterson. He fell down like a rag doll. I mean, that looked like Mark Sanchez out there. And then 2 plays later, Polite comes around the corner and knocks the ball out of his hands. You'd like to see him recover the ball, obviously, but again, after such a sudden change of possession, after a block punt for a special teams, it's been really, really good this year, and probably going to be running some sprints when they get back in January for that performance. But after that block punt, I mean, it was not. I think it was 10-7, or no, it was 7-6 Michigan at the time. They put that ball in the end zone, and it's 14-6, and you can see some heads dropping and things like that. To hold them to 3 at that point, keep it to 10-6. Franks comes out on the next drive, drives down the field, puts them ahead 13-10. I mean, I really put a lot of the game-changing moments in this one were tied directly to the defense and that defensive line especially, which, again, we talk about consistency. It has been excellent in games against LSU and games against Tennessee and games against Florida State, but kind of absent in some games as well. And in this game, they showed up, and they showed up big. And especially in the third and fourth quarter, were able to take control. And Michigan couldn't run the ball, and Patterson started to get happy feet once he got hit a few times, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, that was the most telling stat for me in this game, Will. And I wanted to go look at it, and it was the lack of rushing yards for Michigan. They have 53 yards from their top 2 backs, and that was 3.8 yards per carry there. Their longest run from their top 2 running backs, 8 yards. Both of them had 8-yard carry. That was their long. So Jim Harbaugh, he's not going to win many games if that's the outcome from his top 2 running backs. And I know Higgin was out there, but this was still a pretty good performance by this Gators defense. And Harbaugh's offense is so predicated on that run game, and with this Florida defense and Shea Patterson and the Michigan offensive line, they really couldn't do enough in the passing game. So this was a textbook way of defeating a Jim Harbaugh offense. Stop the run, stop the big play.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because on that first drive, Michigan clearly made an emphasis on getting outside, and I don't recall them getting outside from that point on. So the play by Patterson, obviously, you're getting outside to open the game. The run that was called back that would have been a touchdown if he hadn't stepped out of bounds, again, was getting to the edge. And in fact, he beat David Reese to the edge. And you could see one of the interesting things, I think, is that Amari Burney played some linebacker.
Yeah.
And I think having him in at linebacker was trying to combat allowing Michigan to get to the edge. And I don't recall them getting to the edge at all the rest of the game after that opening drive. And you give up a little bit in terms of maybe oomph at the point of attack if you've got somebody like Burney at linebacker, but you certainly gain in speed in that capacity. And so you start thinking about who may step in at the star position for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson next year. You got Trey Dean already saying he wants it, but Burney, somebody who can step into a linebacker role and has the coverage skills. You can imagine him being in that role as well. Again, I think you go back to Florida and their preparation and what they did to prepare for this game. The minute they saw Michigan trying to go outside and take advantage of their linebackers, they had an answer for that, and Michigan obviously did not have a response.
Yeah, that was another point I wanted to make, Will, is looking at some of the players and looking at the way Todd Grantham dials up this defense. If you're any type of versatile player, you're going to find yourself on this field. And him finding ways, as you said, Burney at linebacker. I also noticed when Dean was struggling at one point in the second half, he was targeted. But then the very next play, Chauncey Gardner is out there outside at cornerback. So, this is versatility personified with Burney and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And those 2 guys were on the field at the same time as well. Because I remember seeing Burney line up almost right over the center at one point at linebacker, and I was like, okay, it must mean. I was like, well, where's Chauncey at? Because on the play before that, Burney was not in the middle of the play. He was shifted towards one more as an outside linebacker or in that star role. But no, he was on the field at the same time with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. So, looking at those 2 guys and Dean being able to play corner and now saying he can go play nickel as well, the versatility that we saw from Gardner, we're seeing from Burney, we're seeing from some of these other players. They got a lot of pieces to work with this defense.
Yeah, well, this I think is where the redshirt rule really makes a difference. We've talked about it all year long in terms of Emory Jones and was he going to get his fourth game and would he get a lot of run in the bowl game? And obviously he had the one drive and that was basically about it. But those 15 practices matter for guys like Amari Burney who can practice the entire time knowing that they're going to have a place in the game plan if it's needed for that game rather than just practicing with no actual payoff at the end. Same thing when you think about Blythe and when you think about Banks and you think about Heggie and those guys on the offensive line who maybe haven't been starters the entire year, but are going to have to be starters next year because 80% of the offensive line is going to be going on to the NFL, and so you know, getting that game, getting those reps, getting those practices with the game reps on the line, I think is maybe one of the hidden things that the redshirt rule is going to allow, and really is something that it seems like Mullen and Grantham took advantage of, and I think it really helped them from a scheming perspective in this game.
Yeah, a couple more players I wanted to single out here on defense. I mean, what a season by C.J. Henderson when he kind of absolutely had to have it. Marco Wilson goes down early in the season against Kentucky, and I mean, just this game showed it, but we all remember the Tennessee game where he makes up the tackle for the Tennessee tight end that was wide open and forces a fumble there for a touchback. But this play he made against Michigan where he kind of out of position really, he had to recover, got to the receiver in the end zone. And broke up the pass that looked like a catch or originally. The referees called it a touchdown. You look at the replay. C.J. Henderson gets his arm in there and kind of shovels the ball a little bit, and the ball hits the ground. But his recovery on that play is the plays he's made all season. Being that number one cornerback when he absolutely had to be. Florida with Wilson and C.J. Henderson out there, they got two number ones. But when Wilson went out, C.J. Henderson had to step up, had to be that guy. Locked down half of the field. And just that play yesterday kind of personified the season that C.J. Henderson had. I mean, he just showed up time and time again in a lot of big plays this season.
Yeah, well, not only the big plays. Again, I think it goes back to that consistency argument that last year he had some pick sixes and he was in the right place at the right time and he made some big interceptions. But the Florida defense gave up 8 yards per pass attempt last year, which was like down in the hundreds. I think it was 108th. This year they were 39th, so 6.8 yards per pass attempt, so significantly better. That's one of the reasons why the defense has improved so much. And the two sort of enduring images for me from the game. I mean, you can look at the interceptions, you can look at the stuff from Franks, all those sorts of things. There were two things I think that really stood out to me. One was after the blocked punt and the safety, that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was playing on the kickoff team when it was what 34 to 15 or whatever it was at that point. And then he gets the pick six 2 plays later. So this guy who's going to make millions of dollars next year, who decided to play in this game, it's a blowout. He's still out there and he's on special teams. I think that makes a difference. And that really sets an impression. The other thing is that on the Gardner interception, the first one where he's bringing it back, CJ Henderson was ahead of him. He was behind him to start and got in front of him to block before the end of that, before Gardner Johnson went out of bounds, and in fact laid a hit on somebody right as Gardner Johnson was going out of bounds. And you look back at the Tennessee game, chasing back the tight end to the fullback or whoever it was in that long play. Like I remember last year against Missouri feeling like some of the players, and Henderson in particular on one deep play, just sort of gave up on the play. There's none of that this year. There's absolutely none of it this year. And again, I think that's a credit to the players. I think it's a credit to Mullen. I think it's a credit to people buying into his vision. And certainly you heard that heading into the bowl game, and you heard that afterwards in terms of the players and their appreciation for Mullen and what he's brought to them and how he sort of presented himself to the team and really become a leader of guys he didn't necessarily recruit. And it really makes you excited for how he's going to be able to interact and interface with the guys that he does recruit, that he's got these close relationships with, for the next 2, 3, 4 years as they come in.
All right, let's single out some players or some key stats here. Will, of course, it was big plays for this defense, and that was key in a blowout here. Ja'Kai Polite tied Clifford Charlton's 1986 single season school record for forced fumbles when he had a forced fumble in the second quarter. There, it was Ja'Kai Polite's 6th forced fumble of the season there. So I mean. is that those 6 forced fumbles lead the nation right now, with some more other bowl games to go. But as it stands right now, 6 forced fumbles from Chick-fil-A Light leads the nation. And the Gators will again a 5-sack performance in this game. With that status, surpassed the 96 and 97 Gators to become the only UF team since 1990 to record uh, 5+ sacks in 5 games. I mean, so it's 5 games where this defensive line, these linebackers, these cornerbacks, you see CJ Henderson get some sacks in there. 5 games this year where they had at least 5 sacks. Well, before the season, we were wondering, if they could hit 30. Well, in 5 games they had 25. So they Todd Grantham style and the athletes and the speed that they had up the front. We were going back to last year and talking about how Randy Shannon kind of likes the lackadaisical type of defensive coordinator. Where's the blitz? Where's the using the speed? Where's the using the athletes that you have? Todd Grantham comes in, and this Gators defense for a lot of the season was a big play, big time defense.
Yeah, it's a credit to Grantham. It's a credit to the players. I mean, in order to run the kinds of schemes Grantham wants to run, your players have to be really disciplined. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of broken plays. I mean, you look at the play against or for the Florida offense, the pass to Ciante Lewis. I mean, that's one where Michigan was trying to play a coverage that they don't typically play, and they got burned. It was the same thing when you looked at them against Ohio State. The minute they went against or went away from the man-to-man defense that they'd been playing all year, there were guys from Ohio State running wide open because they aren't necessarily versatile. So there's something about the way Grantham taught them, and there's something about the player's ability to grasp those concepts that gave him the ability to do that. Now, obviously, when you're getting pressure from your front four, it allows you to do a lot of things on the back end that you can't do if you have to bring a lot of blitzes. And that was really, I think, sort of the difference in the game, is that Michigan had to bring guys in order to get pressure on Franks. When they didn't bring guys, Franks sat back there and had plenty of time. Even a couple of times where he threw into double coverage, and he had the time to get it in there, even if maybe that wasn't the right read. Patterson didn't have that time. He was getting harassed the entire time. And even if he wasn't getting harassed, he felt like he might get harassed. And that, I think, impacted how quickly he got rid of the ball. Certainly he didn't scramble around looking for the second or, looking for an extra read. And so, I mean, it's an impressive thing that Grantham's done. I was one of those people who said, I think he's a decent defensive coordinator. When you look at the stats from where he's been previously to when he's come in, the defenses have marginally improved. They haven't gotten a whole lot better. This defense got a whole lot better. And I don't think anybody really doubted that Mullen was going to make the offense better. I think one of the reasons why people like me picked Florida to be a little bit more middling of the pack was because we suspected that the defense was going to struggle. And that just hasn't been the case. I mean, all the sacks, all the pressure, all the turnovers, all that sort of stuff has led to Florida being able to pull out some of these closer games they've been in. And then obviously you get towards the end of the year, if you score 40 points a game, you're going to win a lot of games. It does make you wonder what would have happened if they'd hired Mullen right after Muschamp. Yeah, because with those defenses that they had under Muschamp, you do have to wonder, how that would have looked for, with his offense, with Jared Davis and Anzalone at middle linebacker. So, but hey, we are where we are, and it was a fun year, and certainly the defense showed out in this one as well.
All right, and not to be forgotten here, Evan McPherson, Will, perfect on his PATs for the entire year, 50 for 50, not to be overlooked there, especially in some of the close games Florida had, and also finished 17 of 19, 18 of 19. If we want to go back to the Kentucky game, but 17 of 19 officially on field goal attempts. So a true freshman coming in at kicker, Will, and the Gators have found them another one. They've had this line of kickers, from Sturgis and Pinheiro, and now McPherson's going to join that line of kickers there. And hey, Florida's going to have him for a few years to come, and definitely a steady force out there. And they're going to play some close games. Close games year in and year out in the SEC. So McPherson's already a weapon in that regard.
Yeah, well, we got one more year at Townsend. So do they have another kid coming in a couple of years? Like, did the older Townsend have a kid now who's going to be ready to punt in a couple of years?
Yeah. Or can we clone him, and in 18 years we'll get him again?
It just feels like we've had a Townsend punting for like a decade. So, or maybe the Wilbur kids will be ready now. Now that Townsend's going to leave after next year. But no, I mean, the special teams have been awesome. I mean, again, you look at sort of the way things went in this game in the first quarter, Michigan was really driving, and or Michigan was consistently moving the ball, and Townsend pins them right at the 5,
Yep.
and sort of sets the tone and makes them have to go 90 yards in order. And I think that was the play, that was the drive where they got a 27-yard pass to Gentry and still had to punt because they'd been pinned so deep. So, and then again, you look at McPherson. When you can send out a kicker and say 50 yards and in, it's going to be good. It gives you a lot of different options. It also allows you to go for it on 4th down more often than you would, because you know that if you need the 3 points at the end of the game, he's going to get it for you. You don't have to worry, okay, it's a 50-50 proposition, so I have to play for it now, versus being able to go for it on 4th down. They did that a couple of times in the game as well. So, I mean, obviously the whatever they were doing on the punt, the sort of little running over to the side that they were doing on the punts is probably something they're going to take a look at on film and try to figure out either how to block it better, or to scrap that and just have him punt normally. But the special teams have been really good all year. It started out excellent. I think they've tailed off a little bit, particularly on the kickoff returns. I think is a place where you can envision somebody like Jacob Copeland maybe taking a step forward on kickoff returns next year. Justin Watkins was somebody who was probably going to do some of that this year, and obviously for much more serious reasons, he wasn't on the team. But you can see that maybe being an area where they develop next year on the kick returns, the punt returns. Swain did a really good job securing those kicks, but outside of the one return that he had, it was usually a fair catch, or maybe a 5-yard return. So there are areas to improve, areas to become more consistent there as well. But certainly the baseline for a very strong special teams exists. And like I said, having guys like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson on the kick return team makes a difference. I mean, when you put your best defensive player and you say, hey, you're going to play special teams, I think it sets a tone for the team. And I think it sets a tone that Michigan clearly didn't have, right? And we wondered, with Gardner-Johnson playing and with the guys in Michigan not, what kind of intensity would there be from both sides? I think Michigan actually came out pretty intense in that first quarter, but I think once it got to 20-10 or 27-10, I think at that point it was pretty much, all right, we're done. Like, we had a good time here, and that's it. And I think some of that attitude is reflected in guys like Gardner-Johnson playing on special teams.
Yeah, and Amari Burton even mentioned it after the game too. He said early on in the season, special teams helped him get adjusted to the speed of the game. He could see the speed of the game from special teams there. So yeah, I agree. Guys that are going to get some serious playing time are out there getting starting. I mean, Damian Pierce, we see him on special teams a whole lot too there. So, some guys that we know are going to make names for themselves when it's all said and done. The Gators are playing special teams this year, and some of the starters from this year's team out there as well. So, Will, before we wrap this up, of course, some news after the game comes out. Right tackle Jawan Taylor is going to declare for the draft. So when it's all said and done, when this season, the Gators will need to replace 4 offensive linemen from this year's team. Ivy, Jordan, Johnson, seniors there, and now Taylor, who's now declaring for the NFL draft. So, I look at it as, hopefully this year one, this was a new system for these guys. Yes, they had some experience, but besides Buchanan, a lot of these guys have a lot of playing time. But it was under previously, Jim McElwain's system, and they were able to get better as the season went on. As we saw, going back after that, since that kind of Kentucky game, this Gator offensive line not much maligned anymore, not necessarily looked at as a weakness on the team. Really got better as the years goes on. So I think even though there's going to be 4 new guys there, this will be their second year under John Hevesy and Dan Mullen's offense. So I think the hope there is, hey, yeah, they're not as experienced as the guys that are leaving. But with a year in this system, maybe that kind of makes up a little ground that they can already hit the ground running, and with the experience that they have when spring rolls around.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope so. I think the other thing that we got to remember is that they've seen this coming. I mean, so they have certainly emphasized the offensive line both last year. They brought in Garage, they brought in Banks, they brought in Blake, and now this year they've got a bunch of different recruits on the offensive line, blue chip guys who are coming in, and I'm assuming are going to have an opportunity to take the reins on some of those jobs. And more than anything, it's going to be one of those things where I think when you had Martez Ivy, 3 years ago, McElwain didn't have the ability to yank him out of there. He didn't have anybody else to play, right? So, and I think we would have seen that this year had there been any injuries. Like, the lack of injuries on the offensive line really did contribute to the continuity and contribute to how much better they were this year versus last year. But a lot of that was Hevesy, and a lot of that was Mullen and his play calling and different things like that too. So, I think there's going to be some hope that hey, 1 year in the system, this is what these guys were able to be. So 1 year in the system for these new guys, they should be at the same level. I think Martez Ivey's a good player. Juwan Taylor's a
Mhm.
good player. Tyler Jordan is a good player. So Fred Johnson's a pretty good player this year. So I think you hope that you're always improving. Mullen is bringing in a higher level of talent, I think, on the offensive line than has been there previously. But obviously the experience counts for something. I mean, going into a bowl game against Alabama, even if you get your butt handed to you, still is an experience that you can fall back on when you're in this game against Michigan. So I think we'll see some inconsistencies next year. I think there will be some guys getting shuffled in and out as they try to figure out who the right guys are for the opportunities. But the good news is it doesn't look like it looks like the Miami game may not be quite as marquee as we maybe thought going into the season. And then you look at sort of the early part of the schedule. I think they're going to have an ability to sort of find who they are up front before they really get into the difficult part of the schedule. And so hopefully by the time Auburn's coming to town or by the time they're playing LSU, all that stuff is ironed out. But this is one of the things you deal with in college football every year. If you're any good, in fact, you want programs where your players are leaving after their junior season because that means they're playing well. And if they're not leaving after the junior season, then your team is probably going 4-7. And so you go 10-3. And part of what goes with that is that when you play really well, the NFL wants your guys. And so congratulations. I mean, Juwan Taylor is going to be a first-round pick. He's going to make an awful lot of money. Ja'Kai Polite, if he decides to leave, probably going to be a first-round pick. He's going to make a lot of money. That's what we want for these guys. They're part of the Gator family. We want them to succeed. We want them to get to the NFL. And, hey, the job of the head coach is to bring in those guys behind them to fill those spots and to be able to coach them up. And so that's always the fun. We wouldn't have anything to talk about if nobody ever got replaced. So so this year's offseason will be all about the offensive line rather than the quarterback, and I can't wait because it has been a long time since we've gone an offseason without having to just harp on the quarterback endlessly, and I'm looking forward to it this offseason.
Absolutely, we will. And before we wrap up here, one of the main off-season storylines last year was getting TC Jefferson and Martez Ivey to come back. So those guys, while we're talking about players leaving, those guys decided to come back. So it was good for them to. It was good to get to see them. Going from 4-7. Coming back, they could have easily left, went on to the NFL. But reading some stuff about Ivy, he really, really loves being a Gator. You hear a lot more from CC Jefferson, so everybody knew that he was a big time Gator. Grew up a Gator fan. Always wanted to be a Gator there. So good on Mullen getting those guys in, getting the seniors to buy in. That was a whole lot of talk in the post game press conferences. Keontae Lewis, saw a video of him. He was bawling, crying and giving hugs to a lot of the players on the field. It being his last game, and he gave a speech to Dan Mullen, kind of on the seniors' behalf, kind of talking about how much it meant to them and how they wish they had more time with Dan Mullen. So a lot of it was a lot of that is lip service, when people talking about buy-in and what they do in the weight room and stuff. But I really do think you can see in year one in Dan Mullen there is some truth to the quote buy-in that when you talk about senior leadership and all that kind of stuff. You hear it. You hear it a whole lot, but I think there's actual results, tangible results to go and look at it for the Gators this year.
Yeah, well, winning cures all, right? I mean, these guys had to walk around campus for an entire offseason, hearing about how bad they were, hearing about how they'd been 4-7, hearing about, Florida State making fun of them. And I mean, they are not oblivious to this sort of stuff. I mean, they all have presences on social media. They all see what people are saying, and I'm sure took it personally. And so, that probably made it easier for Mullen to get them to buy in, but he has to be the guy who comes in and says, hey, I'm the guy who's going to turn this around. And, oh, by the way, you're going to work harder than you've ever worked in your entire life. And I'm sure there were guys on the team, especially initially, who were like, well, wait, it was a whole lot easier under that other guy. like why don't we just keep doing that? And to their credit, they put in the work. They did what they needed to do under Savage. They clearly got stronger, especially up front, and got stronger mentally as well. I think Franks mentioned after the game that the biggest difference between this year and last year is just confidence, that Mullen's been able to instill confidence in him. And I think he did that to all these guys. These are guys who were doubting. You come in as a freshman or you come in as a recruit and you're thinking 3 years you're in the NFL. And if you look at somebody like Lewis or you look at somebody like Ivy, those weren't guys who were necessarily going to get drafted after last year's performance. And so, you sort of feel your dreams slipping away, I'm sure, in some capacity. And for Mullen to be able to bring that back and to be able to bring it back with such a vengeance, I think it's probably where some of that emotion comes from. And then also, they've had to be in the trenches where for a while they were the only guys who believed in them. and now they've got now they've got the fan base behind them. But after that game against Kentucky, there weren't a whole lot of people who were probably saying nice things to him on campus. And so, congratulations to the guys for pushing through. Congratulations to Mullen for helping them to push through that and for making the adjustments that needed to be made, and for really making the progress throughout the year that we've wanted to see over the last 3 years and finally saw this year. I know last year your word was progress for the team, and we saw none. And then this year, we've seen that steadily. I mean, you look at the team after the games against Florida State and Michigan, and you say, okay, that's a team that can go 12-1. That's a team that has an opportunity to compete with Georgia. Now, whether they'll be able to beat Georgia consistently or not is a different question. But can they compete? Absolutely. And so, the days of losing by 50 points to Alabama, if you make it to the SEC championship game, I think are over. I mean, I think if based on what we've seen this year, I think Mullen would have a really solid game plan going in against Alabama. May still get beat, but they're not going to be outclassed, and they're certainly not going to be outcoached. And that brings a level of confidence to the players that I think is going to bode well for Florida downstream. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to do, but a very, very, very good first step.
Yeah, fun season, Will. That's what I'm saying. Hey, look, we talked about progress from the last couple seasons. We saw that. We wanted some fun. We saw that in Dan Mullen's first season, 10 wins by the time 13 games rolled around. And it did. I can't get over just how much fun, going to Gainesville was this year, the LSU game. And it all kind of capped off here with a win against Michigan. So, Will, you released your kind of review of the game on Read Reaction. Before we go here, what else you got coming up on the site? Any kind of season and look back season stuff?
Yeah, I'll probably have a look back. I know certainly people have given me some crap about some of the stuff that I've written that's been negative, particularly after the spring game. So I'll go back and look at the things I got right, things I got wrong. Certainly some broader issue things that I haven't necessarily written about before. So I may take a look at Briles as the offensive coordinator at Florida State, and sort of, obviously we've got National Signing Day coming up not too far from now. So recruiting is going to be on the forefront of everybody's mind coming up as well. But, it's been a really fun season. I've learned a lot. I mean, this is the first year I've had the site going throughout a season. And so I've learned a lot, and I think we're going to try to add some components this off season. So probably be doing some things with some video and some other things. We'll see how people like it. We'll experiment. Some things will probably fail. Some things will go really well, but it'll be fun. It'll certainly be hopefully educational, and people enjoy it.
All right. I don't know when the next episode of Gators Breakdown will be. I don't know if I'll do another one later this week or just wait till next week. But everybody stay tuned and on Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. And I'll make sure I get it out there. But Will, it's been fun talking about these Gators every week as well. Not just going to games and watching these Gators, but hey, we didn't have to endure speaking about the third and long play actions and crazy nonchalant shark jokes and death threats, and we're in a much better place now.
Well, Cody Jones on Twitter, I saw him. He said that he thought that McElwain should be involved for the Miami job because he obviously prefers being closer to the ocean. So, so I enjoyed that immensely. So thanks, Cody, for that. But no, man, it's a great time to talk about Florida. Certainly, we're privileged to be able to do this. I think on behalf of all Gator Nation, I want to say thank you to you, Dave. I mean, obviously, 3 episodes a week of this podcast is valuable to people that are out there. Clearly, based on the feedback that we've heard, but it's not easy to do. It's not easy to take these evenings away from your family, and so I know that just as well as you do. But you do it 3 times, and I do it once. So obviously, thanks to you, man. And congratulations on the podcast, the way it's grown, and look forward to keep doing it during the off season and into next year.
Absolutely. We'll keep growing Gators Breakdown. Thanks, Will, for those kind words there, and everybody who I met in Atlanta yesterday, partied with, hung out with, talked in the stadium with. Thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown. We will dial it back down to about 1 episode a week here during the off season. Maybe ramp it up around recruiting and all that kind of stuff. But from here on out till the season, till about August, will be about 1 episode a week now. It's a lot of fun, a lot of work, but all worth it when we get to see our Gators play well and discuss it afterwards. So, all right, Will, anything else?
No, man, just go Gators. It's been fun.
All right. Heck yeah. All right. There we go. It's Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. and his site, readandreaction.com. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.